There are moments in life when fate seems to toy with our sanity, creating coincidences so impossible they make us question if we're truly in control of our own stories. My name is Carol. I'm 67 years old, and for my entire life, I believed I understood how the world worked, until the day a stranger appeared out of nowhere to save my grandson and changed everything I thought I knew about family, coincidence, and destiny. What began as a terrible accident transformed into a journey that would unearth secrets buried for 15 years, test the limits of trust between a mother and daughter, and prove that sometimes the most unlikely people are exactly who we need to save us. But before I tell you how a mysterious man bent sheet metal with his bare hands, I need to explain why our family nearly tore itself apart trying to understand if he was a blessing or a threat. This is the story of how we discovered that angels really do exist, but that recognizing them can be the hardest part of receiving a miracle. The sound still echoes in my mind as if it were yesterday, a dry metallic crunch followed by a silence that seemed to suck all the life out of the world around me. I am Carol Peterson. I'm 67 years old, and for 2 decades, I've cared for my grandson Leo as if he were my own son. On that December afternoon in 2022, in Knoxville, Tennessee, my life changed forever in a way I could never have imagined. It was a typical Tuesday in the Tennessee summer, with that sticky humidity that clings to your skin and makes you search for shade at every turn. My house on Magnolia Street has always been a refuge for Leo, especially after my daughter, Rose, started working 2 jobs to support the family. The 7-year-old boy had boundless energy and a curiosity that sometimes scared me. That day he was in the backyard, playing with his plastic cars in the red clay that characterizes our region. Leo was always different from other kids. While his schoolmates preferred to be glued to tablets and phones, my grandson was enchanted by simple things. Ants carrying leaves, the sound of the wind in the magnolia tree leaves, the flight of kites the older boys would fly in the nearby vacant lot. His mother said he had too much imagination, but I saw in it a special sensitivity, something that reminded me of myself as a child. That afternoon, a red and yellow kite flew low over our yard. Leo dropped his toys instantly and was mesmerized, following the colorful movement with eyes shining with delight. I was in the kitchen, preparing his afternoon snack, cinnamon toast his favorite, when I heard the iron gate creak. "Leo, where are you going, sweetie?" I shouted from the window, but he had already disappeared around the corner, chasing that kite as if it were the most important thing in the world. My heart pounded. Magnolia Street opened directly onto Kingston Pike, one of the busiest roads in the city, especially at that time when people were heading home from work. I dropped everything and ran after him, my flip-flops slapping against the hot asphalt. But my 67 years didn't allow for the speed I needed. With every step, I felt my chest tighten, not just from the physical exertion, but from the terrible fear growing inside me. Leo was out of sight, and all I could think about was how I would explain to Rose that I had lost her only son. When I reached the corner, I saw the scene that would haunt me for the next few months. Leo was standing in the middle of the avenue, looking up, completely oblivious to the heavy traffic coming his way. The kite had gotten tangled in the power lines right above him, swaying in the wind as if mocking the dangerous situation. A soda delivery truck was speeding in the right lane, and the driver clearly hadn't seen the small figure in the middle of the street. I screamed with all the strength I had, but my voice was lost in the traffic noise. Other pedestrians also noticed the situation and began to shout, pointing at the boy. The truck driver finally saw Leo and slammed on the brakes so hard I could hear the tires screeching on the asphalt. But it was too late. Physics is cruel to children who play in dangerous places. The impact didn't happen the way I expected. Instead of hitting Leo directly, the truck skidded and collided with our old blue Chevy Cobalt. which was parked exactly where my grandson had stopped. The noise was deafening, shattering glass, twisting metal, the hiss of a punctured radiator. A cloud of dust and steam rose, hiding everything for a few endless seconds. When the dust settled, I ran towards the wreckage. Our car was unrecognizable, a mass of twisted metal and glass scattered across the asphalt. And in the midst of that destruction, I could see a small, unconscious figure trapped in the wreckage. Leo had been thrown into the car at the moment of impact, and now he was there, motionless, his face pale, with a few cuts on his left arm. People started to gather, some calling 911, others just watching with that morbid curiosity that characterizes such situations. I wanted to get to him, but the wreckage was so entangled that it seemed impossible to get the boy out without special equipment. Despair took hold of me in a way I had never experienced before. That's when he appeared. A tall man with well-groomed gray hair and blue eyes that seemed transparent in the late afternoon light. He wore a simple white shirt and jeans, both clean and pressed, which contrasted with the filth of the situation. He approached with a calmness that intrigued me, as if traffic accidents were part of his daily routine. "Excuse me," he said, his voice soft but firm. The people around automatically moved aside, as if recognizing some kind of authority in him. He didn't introduce himself then, didn't explain who he was or where he had come from. He simply knelt beside the wreckage and began to assess the situation. What happened next defies any logical explanation. The man gripped the twisted metal sheets with his bare hands and, with precise and seemingly effortless movements, began to open a space in the wreckage. It was as if the metal yielded to his will, bending almost fluidly. Some people around murmured in disbelief, but I was too focused on Leo to question what I was seeing. In a few minutes he had created an opening large enough to reach my grandson. With extreme care, he lifted the small unconscious body, checking vital signs with the precise gestures of someone who knows first aid. Leo was breathing, but still unconscious, with a few superficial scratches on his face and arm. "He's all right," the man said, placing Leo in my arms. "Just some superficial cuts. Nothing that time and proper care won't heal." His voice had a reassuring quality that made me immediately believe his words. At that moment, holding my grandson in my arms and feeling his steady breath against my chest, an immense gratitude washed over me. I turned to thank the man who had saved Leo's life, but he had completely disappeared. I looked in every direction, asked the people around, but no one knew where he had gone. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, along with the fire department and 2 police cars. Leo had woken up in my arms a few minutes earlier, confused and scared, but apparently without serious injuries. The paramedics examined him carefully, confirmed there were no fractures or internal injuries, and released us to go home after applying some bandages to the scratches. Throughout the entire process, I couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious man. How had he managed to bend those metal sheets with his bare hands? Where had he come from? And where had he gone? Why did no one else seem to have paid attention to the strangeness of the situation? That night, after putting Leo to bed, he had insisted on sleeping in my bed, still shaken by the scare. I lay awake thinking about everything that had happened. The accident, the miraculous rescue, the man's sudden disappearance. Part of me began to question if it had all really happened as I remembered, or if the shock of the moment had distorted my perception of reality. But there was one thing I was absolutely sure of. Leo was alive and well, sleeping peacefully beside me, and someone, no matter who he was or how he had done it, was responsible for that. Someone had appeared at the exact moment we needed him most, and had saved my grandson's life. In the following days, I tried to find out more about the mysterious man. I asked the neighbors, the local shopkeepers, anyone who might have seen something. But the information was vague and contradictory. Some said they had seen a tall, well-dressed man in the area. Others spoke of a gentleman who sometimes appeared to help people in trouble. but no one knew his name or where he lived. The only concrete lead I got was from Patty, who had been selling hot dogs on the corner of Kingston Pike for over 15 years. She told me she sometimes saw a man with the characteristics I described hanging around the downtown transit center, especially on weekends, always helping someone in need. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I needed to find that man, not just to thank him properly, but because something inside me said that our story with him was far from over. There was something in his eyes, a deep sadness hidden behind that unshakable calm, that made me believe he needed help as much as he had helped us. What I didn't know at that moment was that finding this man would be just the beginning of a sequence of events that would completely change the structure of our family, test relationships I thought were solid, and make me question everything I believed I knew about the people closest to me. The call to Rose was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. It was almost 8 at night when I finally worked up the courage to dial her cell number. Leo was sleeping soundly, exhausted by the day's events, and I had spent the last 2 hours mentally rehearsing how I would tell my daughter that her son had nearly lost his life under my care. "Mom, glad you called," Rose said as soon as she answered, with that tired voice that had become her signature in recent years. "I was just thinking about calling to see how Leo's day was. I hope he wasn't too much trouble." Trouble? The word echoed bitterly in my mind. If she knew what had happened, she certainly wouldn't use such a simple term. "Rose, I need to talk to you about something that happened today," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's nothing serious now, but—" "What is it, Mom? Just spit it out. I'm finishing up my second shift and still have to catch 2 buses to get home." I took a deep breath and told her everything. The backyard, the kite, the desperate run to the avenue, the accident, and especially about the mysterious man who had saved Leo from the wreckage. Throughout the entire narrative, the silence on the other end of the line made me more and more nervous. "Let me get this straight," she said finally, in a tone I couldn't quite decipher. "Leo ran out of the yard, was almost hit by a truck, got trapped in a wrecked car, and a stranger who appeared out of nowhere managed to pull him out with his bare hands?" "That's exactly what happened, honey. I know it sounds hard to believe, but— Mom, are you listening to yourself? You're describing a situation where my son almost died because you couldn't watch him properly." The accusation hit me like a punch to the gut. It was exactly what I feared most, but hearing the words from my own daughter's mouth hurt in a way I wasn't prepared for. "Rose, please, try to understand. It was an accident. The boy is curious, you know that. And besides, he's okay. Whoever that man was, he saved our boy. Our boy." Her voice went up an octave. "He's my son, Mom. Mine. And I trusted you to take care of him while I work myself to the bone to give us a better life." Rose's tone was becoming increasingly hostile, and I began to realize that this conversation was not going in the direction I had hoped. During Leo's 7 years of life, we had always been able to talk about everything, to solve any problem that arose. But something in her voice that night was different, harder, as if an invisible barrier had been erected between us. "Honey, I understand you're scared. I was too. But the important thing is that Leo is fine. The doctor said it was a miracle he wasn't seriously hurt." "A miracle?" She laughed bitterly. "Mom, you're not seeing the gravity of the situation. My son was in an accident that could have killed him, and the only explanation you have is that a mysterious man appeared out of nowhere and bent sheet metal with his bare hands." When she put it that way, I understood how absurd the story sounded. But I had seen it with my own eyes, had held Leo in my arms right after. It wasn't my imagination or an exaggeration caused by shock. I know how it sounds, Rose, but that's exactly what happened. Several people saw it. You can ask the neighbors, anyone who was on the street at that moment. "All right, Mom. I'll pick Leo up tomorrow after work and we'll talk about this in person. I need to see for myself how he is." The call ended abruptly, leaving me with a terrible feeling in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt that Rose no longer trusted me. And worse, I began to question if she had a reason to. That night, I barely slept. Leo tossed and turned beside me, murmuring incomprehensible words during the nightmares that began that very night. Every time he stirred, I calmed him by stroking his hair. But inside I was consumed by guilt and worry about Rose's reaction. The next morning, Leo woke up quieter than usual. During breakfast, he played with his cinnamon toast instead of eating it, pushing the crumbs around the table with his index finger. "Grandma, was that man yesterday an angel?" he asked suddenly, with the brutal sincerity that only children possess. The question caught me off guard. "Why do you think that, my love?" "Because he appeared when I needed him and then disappeared. And because he had different eyes. Sad but kind." I watched my grandson carefully. Leo had always been an observant child, capable of noticing details that adults often ignore. If he had noticed the sadness in the man's eyes, perhaps there was more to the story of this mysterious savior than I imagined. "I don't know what he was, Leo, but I'm sure he was sent to help you." The rest of the morning passed slowly. I tried to keep our routine normal, but both Leo and I were visibly shaken by the previous day's events. He didn't want to play in the yard, preferring to stay in the living room watching cartoons, always very close to me. Around 2 in the afternoon, Rose arrived early from work. She walked in the front door with a serious expression she couldn't hide, greeting Leo with exaggerated kisses and hugs, checking every scratch on his arms as if she were a detective investigating crime scene evidence. "Mom, I need to talk to you," she said after examining her son from head to toe. "Leo, go play in Grandma's room while she and I talk." When we were alone in the living room, Rose sat in the armchair across from the sofa where I was, adopting a formal posture that immediately made me nervous. "Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation last night, and I need to be honest about something. For the past few months, I've noticed you've been a bit forgetful, confused about some things." "What do you mean by that?" I asked, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. "Last week you called me 3 times asking if I had picked up Leo, when he was here with you the whole time. Last month you left the stove on twice, when I came to get him." I vaguely remembered those incidents, but had always attributed them to fatigue and a busy routine. Hearing Rose list them like that made me see a pattern I had ignored. "And yesterday," she continued, "you tell me a story about a mysterious man who bends metal with his bare hands and then disappears into thin air. Mom, don't you think that sounds like your imagination?" "Rose, I saw it with my own eyes. It wasn't my imagination. Or maybe you saw something, but the shock of the moment made it seem different from what really happened. Maybe it was a firefighter who arrived before the ambulance, or someone with the proper equipment." Her suggestion made logical sense, but I knew that wasn't it. There was something about the man's presence, the way he moved, the supernatural calm with which he handled the situation, that couldn't be explained conventionally. "Honey, I understand your concern, but I'm not confused about what happened yesterday." Rose sighed deeply, as if making a difficult decision. "Mom, I love you, and I know you love Leo more than anything in the world. But after what happened yesterday, I no longer feel comfortable leaving my son in your care without supervision." The words fell on me like a ton of bricks. In a single sentence, Rose had questioned my mental capacity, my version of the facts, and my competence as my own grandson's caregiver. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, trying to maintain some dignity in my voice. "I'm going to talk to my boss to see if I can work part-time, at least for a while. And when that's not possible, I'll leave Leo in the school's full-time daycare." "Rose, please, don't do that. The boy loves being here. This house is his second home." "It was, Mom. It was his second home. But after yesterday, I need to rethink some things." At that moment, Leo appeared at the living room door, having clearly overheard the part of the conversation. His big eyes looked at me with a sadness that broke my heart. "Mommy, I don't want to go to daycare. I want to stay with Grandma." Rose stood up and took her son's hand. "Sweetheart, sometimes we have to make changes so that everyone can be safer and happier. But I'm safe with Grandma, and the man with the sad eyes said he would take care of me." Rose's expression hardened even more. "Leo, there's no man with sad eyes. That was just a scare you both had yesterday." "Yes, there is, Mummy. He talked to me before he left." This was the first I'd heard of this. Leo hadn't mentioned any conversation with the mysterious man. "What did he say to you, my love?" I asked, ignoring Rose's disapproving look. "He said I was very brave, and that there would always be someone looking out for me, and that one day I would understand why he had to help children." Rose shook her head impatiently. "Enough of this. Leo, get your things. We're going home." "But, Mommy, today's not the day to go home. I always sleep here on Tuesdays. Today is different, sweetheart. We're going to establish a new routine." While Leo reluctantly gathered his toys, Rose approached me with an expression that mixed pity and determination. "Mom, I don't want this to turn into a fight between us, but I need to protect my son. And after what happened yesterday, I'm not sure he's protected here." They left the house in the late afternoon, leaving me alone with a heavy silence and a pain in my chest that seemed to grow with each passing minute. For the first time in 7 years, the house was empty without Leo's presence, and I began to realize that I might have lost much more than a normal day with my grandson. That night, alone in the kitchen, looking at the chair where Leo always sat for breakfast, a certainty began to form in my mind. I had to find that mysterious man, not just to prove to Rose that I wasn't imagining things, but because something told me our story, with him, was just beginning. What I didn't know was that my search for answers would reveal secrets that would shake the foundations of our family even more, and that the coming weeks would force me to fight not only for the credibility of my version of the facts, but for the very custody of my grandson. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. The house, which had always been filled with Leo's contagious energy, now echoed with an emptiness that seemed to suck all the joy from the rooms. I had tried to maintain a normal routine, making his bed every morning, preparing the afternoon snack he wouldn't be there to eat. But each daily gesture only intensified the feeling of loss. On Thursday morning, I made a decision that would change the course of everything. I would go look for the mysterious man, not out of curiosity or just gratitude, but out of absolute necessity. I needed to prove to Rose that I wasn't losing my mind, that my version of the facts was real and trustworthy. I began my search at the downtown transit center, following the only clue I had from Patty. The station was a place I knew well, as I had worked there as a cleaner for 15 years before retiring. I knew every corner, every bench, every hiding spot where people used to shelter from the strong sun or rain. The first person I looked for was Walter, a 72-year-old man who had been selling candy and gum from a small stand for over 2 decades. If anyone knew the regulars in that area, it would be him. "Walter, do you know a tall man, gray hair, very light blue eyes, who sometimes shows up here helping people?" The man stopped arranging the candy on his tray and looked at me attentively. "Mrs. Peterson, it's been a while since I've seen you around here. How's retirement treating you?" "It's going well, Walter. Thank you. But I'm looking for this man I described. It's very important." He scratched his gray beard, thoughtful. "Well, there is a guy who fits that description, but he's not one for conversation. Shows up now and then, always well-dressed, helps who needs it, and disappears. The folks around here call him Elias." My heart pounded. Elias! It was the same name he had given me on the day of the accident. "Do you know where he lives? Or how I can find him?" "That I don't know, ma'am. But Maria, who sells hot dogs over on the corner, said she's seen him talking to the street folks sometimes. Maybe she knows more. I thanked Walter and headed for the hot dog stand. Maria was a woman in her 50s, known in the area for her friendliness and her loose tongue. If there was gossip or information circulating at the transit center, she would surely know. "Maria, I need some information. I'm looking for a man named Elias, tall gray hair, who sometimes shows up here." Her eyes lit up immediately. "Oh, Elias! That man is a blessing, Mrs. Peterson. I don't know how many times I've seen him helping people in a jam around here. Just last week, he helped a lady who had fallen and hurt her leg. Do you know where he lives?" Maria lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. "Well, I'm not sure, but they say he lives in a kind of makeshift shelter under the Hall of Fame Drive overpass. He's not exactly a regular homeless person, you know. He's different. Always clean, always polite. But he lives alone and doesn't accept help from anyone." This information intrigued me deeply. How could someone living under an overpass maintain that impeccable appearance I had seen on the day of the accident? "Have you ever talked to him?" "A few times. He sometimes comes here to buy a hot dog. Always pays correctly. Always thanks me politely. But he's a very private person. When I tried to ask about his life, he changed the subject right away." "And does he really help people like you all say?" "Oh, Lord, does he ever. Last month he saw a boy drowning in the creek that runs near the station. Jumped in the water with his clothes on and everything to save the child. When the boy's mother wanted to thank him, he was already gone." A pattern began to form in my mind. Elias seemed to have a special tendency to save children in dangerous situations. This couldn't be a coincidence. I spent the rest of the morning talking to other people in the area. Cleaners, street vendors, retirees who frequented the station benches to pass the time. Everyone knew Elias. Everyone had stories to tell about his good deeds, but no one knew intimate details about his life. At lunchtime, I decided to follow the lead of the Hall of Fame Drive overpass. It was about a 20-minute walk under the strong December sun, but I was determined to find answers. As I got closer to the location, I started to see the characteristic signs of people experiencing homelessness. Old mattresses, plastic bags with belongings, makeshift stoves. Under the overpass, I found a small community of about 15 people. Men and women of various ages, some clearly with substance abuse problems, others who seemed to have simply lost their homes due to life circumstances. They looked at me with initial suspicion, but when I explained that I was looking for Elias, their expressions changed completely. "Ma'am, you know Elias?" asked a woman of about 40, with disheveled hair but kind eyes. "He's like a guardian angel to us here. I need to talk to him about something very important. Do you know where I can find him?" An older man, who introduced himself as Sebastian, approached. "Elias doesn't exactly live here with us, you see. He has his own little spot, back behind those big rocks, but he doesn't much like visitors. Please, it's really urgent. My grandson. He helped my grandson a few days ago." Sebastian's expression softened. "Ah, so you're the mother of one of the children he saved. That explains a lot." "What do you mean?" "Elias has a special thing with kids. Whenever something happens to a child in the area, he finds out and shows up to help. It's like he has a sixth sense for these situations." Sebastian led me to a more secluded area, behind some large rocks that formed a kind of natural shelter. There, I found what could be called the most organized home I'd ever seen for someone in his situation. There was a clean mattress, covered with impeccable white sheets, a few books stacked neatly, clothes folded inside transparent plastic bags, and most impressively, a small makeshift sink with running water, apparently illegally connected to the city's water supply system. "Elias!" shouted Sebastian. "There's a lady here who wants to talk to you." After a few minutes, he appeared from a direction I hadn't noticed before. He looked exactly as I remembered. Clean and well-kept clothes, combed gray hair, piercing blue eyes. When he saw me, His expression showed no surprise, as if he had been expecting this visit. "Mrs. Peterson," he said with that calm voice I remembered perfectly. "How is little Leo?" The fact that he remembered our names impressed me, but it also confirmed that our encounter had not been my imagination. "He's physically fine, but—" I hesitated, not knowing exactly how to explain the situation. "I need to talk to you about what happened that day." Elias nodded to Sebastian, who understood the signal and discreetly walked away. Then he invited me to sit on one of the rocks that served as makeshift furniture. "I know why you came here," he said before I could even start talking. "Your daughter doesn't believe your version of the facts, does she?" The accuracy of his observation left me momentarily speechless. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been through similar situations before. When extraordinary things happen, people tend to look for ordinary explanations. It's more comfortable for them. But did you really do what I saw? Did you bend those metal sheets with your bare hands?" Elias looked at his own hands for a moment, as if studying something on them. "Mrs. Peterson, sometimes we are capable of things we don't fully understand, especially when there is an urgent need to protect someone innocent. That doesn't answer my question, because it's not a question that can be answered simply. But I can give you something better than an answer. I can help you solve the problem with your daughter." "How?" "By coming with you to talk to her, confirming your version of the facts, showing her that you're not confused or imagining things." The offer was exactly what I needed, but there was something in the way he expressed himself that intrigued me. It was as if he knew details of our family situation that I hadn't mentioned. "Why would you do this for us? You barely know us." Elias was silent for a long moment, looking towards the horizon where the sun was beginning to dip towards the end of the afternoon. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a deep sadness that touched me unexpectedly. "Because 15 years ago, I couldn't save a child who needed me. And ever since, I've been trying to make up for that failure by helping other children whenever possible. What happened 15 years ago? That's a conversation for another time, Mrs. Peterson. For now, let's focus on resolving your situation with Rose and ensuring that Leo has the united family he deserves." I accepted his offer, though I felt there was much more to this story than he was willing to reveal at that moment. We agreed that he would come to my house on Saturday morning, when Rose usually brought Leo for weekend visits. When I got home that afternoon, I felt more hopeful than I had in days. I finally had a plan to prove my sanity and regain my daughter's trust. But a part of me sensed that discovering the truth about Elias would reveal secrets that went far beyond what I was prepared to face. On Friday night, Rose called to confirm she would bring Leo on Saturday, but with a condition that sent a chill down my spine. She would stay at the house during the entire visit, supervising every moment of interaction between me and my grandson. It was as if I had become a dangerous person from whom my own grandson needed to be protected. Saturday dawned with those heavy clouds typical of a Tennessee summer, laden with moisture and promising rain for the end of the day. I woke up at 5 in the morning, too anxious to continue sleeping, and spent the first few hours obsessively cleaning the house. Every cushion was repositioned, every surface was wiped 3 times, as if perfect organization could somehow influence the outcome of the conversation to come. At 9 all right on the dot, I heard the gate creak and the familiar voices of Rose and Leo approaching the front door. My grandson came running ahead, as he always did, but when he saw me standing on the doorstep, his run slowed to a hesitant walk. There was something different in his behavior, a caution that had never existed between us before. "Grandma," he said, but the hug he gave me was quicker and less intense than usual. Behind him, Rose approached with a serious expression and a large bag slung over her shoulder, clearly prepared for a long stay. "Good morning, Mom," she said, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. "I brought some things to spend the day here. I hope you don't mind." "Of course not, honey. This has always been your home, too." We all went inside together, and I immediately noticed how the dynamic had changed. Rose positioned herself to always have Leo in her line of sight, like an alert guard monitoring every move. Leo, in turn, seemed confused by the new situation, looking alternately at me and his mother, as if trying to understand the rules of this game he didn't know. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something before the morning gets too far along," Rose said, sitting in the living room in a way that blocked Leo's view of the backyard. "I spoke with a social worker this week." The words hit me like a lightning bolt. "A social worker? Why?" "Because after what happened on Tuesday, I need to be sure I'm making the right decisions about my son's well-being. The professional advised me on signs to watch for in cases of cognitive decline in elderly caregivers." The phrase, cognitive decline, echoed in my mind like a sentence. Rose was officially questioning my sanity and had sought professional support for her suspicions. "And what did this social worker tell you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "That episodes of confusion, making up fantasy stories to explain accidents, and insisting on unrealistic versions of events can be early indicators of senile dementia." Leo, who was playing with a toy car on the floor, looked up upon hearing our conversation. "Mommy, why are you talking about Grandpa Elias like he doesn't exist?" Rose sighed impatiently. "Leo, there's no Grandpa Elias. That was just a scare you both had." "But I talked to him, Mommy." "He told me he had a son who looked like me." This was new information to me. Elias had mentioned a child he couldn't save 15 years ago, but he hadn't detailed anything about that story. "Leo, tell Mommy exactly what the man said to you," I asked, ignoring Rose's disapproving look. My grandson sat on the floor and began to speak with that crystal-clear sincerity of children. "He said I was very brave, and that he had a boy my age who also liked kites. But that boy had gone to heaven, and that's why he now takes care of other children." Rose shook her head. "Mom, don't you see? Leo is elaborating on details based on the story you told him. Kids do that all the time." It was at that moment that I heard the knock on the front door. 3 firm, polite, but determined knocks. My heart pounded because I knew exactly who it was. "Excuse me," I said, getting up quickly. "I think we have a visitor." When I opened the door, Elias was there, exactly as I had seen him on Thursday under the overpass. Clean and well-pressed clothes, combed hair, and those piercing blue eyes that seemed to see much more than most people could perceive. "Good morning, Mrs. Peterson. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. Please come in." My daughter and grandson are in the living room. Elias followed me to the living room, where Rose had become visibly tense upon hearing an unfamiliar male voice. When she saw him, her expression changed from tension to complete disbelief. "Leo!" my grandson shouted, jumping up from the floor and running towards the visitor. "I knew you would come back." Elias knelt to be at Leo's height and smiled in a way that completely transformed his expression, revealing a deep tenderness that contrasted with the constant sadness in his eyes. "Hey, little brave one. How are you feeling?" "I'm fine, but Mommy doesn't believe you exist." Elias stood up and looked at Rose, who remained seated in the armchair as if paralyzed. "Mrs. Peterson, I imagine. I'm Elias. I had the privilege of helping your son a few days ago." His voice had a hypnotic quality, calm and confident, that seemed to fill every space in the room. Rose looked him up and down, clearly trying to process the fact that the mysterious man actually existed. You're real," she finally said, more to herself than to him. "As real as your concern for Leo's well-being," Elias replied. "And I perfectly understand your doubts about what happened on Tuesday. Under normal circumstances, I would question a story like this, too." Rose slowly stood up, still studying Elias, as if he were an apparition that might disappear at any moment. "How did you do that? How did you get my son out of the car wreckage?" "Sometimes, when there's an urgent need to protect an innocent life, we are able to find strength we didn't know we possessed." he said, repeating almost exactly the words he had used with me 2 days before. "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give because I don't fully understand what happened at that moment myself. I just know that I saw a child in danger and had to act." Leo approached Elias and held his hand. "Tell Mommy about your son who liked kites." Elias's expression transformed instantly, the sadness in his eyes deepening in a way that was almost physical to observe. He looked at Leo, then at me, and finally at Rose. 15 years ago, I had a son named Raphael. He was 7, exactly Leo's age now. He was a curious child, full of life, who loved to fly kites in the late afternoon. The silence in the room was absolute. Even Leo had stopped moving, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. One day he was playing in the backyard when a kite got tangled in the high-voltage wires on the street. Raphael tried to climb the pole to get the kite, and Elias paused, clearly fighting deep emotions. I was inside, working. I heard the neighbors' screams, but by the time I got outside, it was too late. Rose brought a hand to her mouth, clearly moved by the story. Since that day, I've lived with the guilt of not being there when my son needed me most. And ever since, every time I see a child in danger, I feel like it's a new opportunity to make up for my failure. "What happened to your wife?" Rose asked, her initial hostility replaced by compassion. She couldn't cope with the loss. "We separated 6 months later. She rebuilt her life in another state, and I chose to live in a way that I would always be available to help when needed." The story explained a lot. The simple life under the overpass, the dedication to helping children, the constant sadness in his eyes. Elias had transformed his personal guilt into a life mission. "That's why you help children," I said, more as a statement than a question. "That's why I need to help children," he corrected. "Every child I can protect is a way of honoring Raphael's memory." Leo let go of Elias's hand and ran to Rose. "Mommy, do you believe he exists now?" Rose picked up her son and looked at me over his head. Her expression had changed completely, from suspicion to something that seemed like shame, mixed with relief. "Mom, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have doubted you." "You don't need to apologize, honey. You were protecting your son. Any mother would do the same." Elias approached us. "Mrs. Peterson, may I suggest something? How about I visit you regularly for a while? That way you can see that your mother is perfectly lucid and capable of caring for Leo. And at the same time, I can help with some household chores that might be getting heavy for a 67-year-old lady." The proposal completely surprised me. I didn't expect him to offer to get so involved with our family. "I don't know." Rose hesitated. "Mommy, please," Leo begged. "Grandpa Elias can live in the back room. He can take care of the garden with Grandma." Rose looked at me questioningly, and I realized this was my chance to regain not only her trust, but also the constant presence of my grandson. "It would be wonderful to have some help," I said, "and Leo really likes him." "All right," Rose said finally. "Let's try it. But I want to visit frequently to see how things are going." At that moment, thinking of the joy on Leo's face and the relief of having regained Rose's trust, I thought we had solved our problems. I had no idea that Elias's constant presence in our lives would reveal secrets about the past that would shake the very foundations of our family in ways I could never have imagined. The rain started to fall in the late afternoon, just as the clouds had promised since morning, and as the 4 of us sat on the porch watching the storm, a strange feeling came over me, as if we were in the eye of a hurricane, experiencing a temporary calm before much stronger winds began to blow. The next 2 weeks were the most peaceful our family had experienced in a long time. Elias moved into the small room out back, transforming the little space into an organized and welcoming environment. During the day, he helped with chores, fixed small problems around the house, and developed a routine of care with Leo that impressed even Rose. who visited almost daily to observe how things were going. Leo had blossomed with Elias's constant presence. The nightmares about the accident practically disappeared, replaced by cheerful mornings where he would wake up early to help his new grandpa water the garden they had planted together in the backyard. It was touching to watch how the two interacted, Elias clearly seeing features of his lost son in Leo, and my grandson soaking up the affectionate attention like a dry sponge finally receiving water. But it was precisely this apparent harmony that made what happened on a Tuesday in January all the more devastating. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch when I heard the doorbell ring insistently. 3 long rings, then a pause, then 3 more. It was a pattern I didn't recognize, different from the polite way people usually announced their arrival. When I opened the door, I found a woman in her 40s with disheveled blonde hair, red eyes from recent crying, wearing clothes that were once elegant, but now looked neglected. She looked at me with an intensity that made me immediately uncomfortable. "Are you Carol?" she asked, her voice hoarse and anxious. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" "My name is Helen Carter. I need to speak with a man named Elias, who, according to my information, is living here." Something in her tone alerted me to potential trouble. "May I ask what this is about?" "It's about my son, Lucas. He disappeared 3 days ago, and I have reason to believe this Elias may have information about what happened to him." My blood ran cold. The implied accusation in her statement was terrible, and I immediately thought of Leo playing in the yard with Elias at that very moment. "Ma'am, I think there's a misunderstanding. Elias is someone who helps children, not someone who—" "That's exactly what I want to clarify," Helen interrupted. "May I come in?" Reluctantly, I invited her into the living room. Helen sat on the edge of the armchair, clearly agitated, constantly looking towards the backyard, where I could hear the voices of Leo and Elias talking about the plants. "Tell me about your son," I said, trying to stay calm. "Lucas is 8 years old. Last week he was playing at the park near the downtown transit center when a man approached him. From the descriptions I got from other children who were there, this man exactly matches Elias's description. Tall, gray hair, blue eyes, always well-dressed. And what did this man do? According to the other children, he talked to Lucas for a few minutes, gave him some candy, and then they left the park together. Lucas didn't come home that night." The story was worrying, but something didn't add up. "And did you talk to the police?" "Of course I did. But they said they need to wait 48 hours to officially consider it a disappearance. And when they finally opened the case, they started investigating and found out that several people in the area know this, Elias." "And what did these people say about him?" Helen hesitated for a moment, as if she didn't know exactly how to interpret the information she had gathered. "They said he always helps children in difficult situations, that he's a good person, but they also said he's different, that he has a strange obsession with children." At that moment, I heard footsteps approaching from the back door. Elias and Leo came into the kitchen, both with dirty hands and smiles on their faces. When Elias saw Helen in the living room, his expression changed instantly, from joy to something I can only describe as recognition mixed with resignation. "Helen," he said simply, as if he had been expecting this visit. The woman jumped to her feet. "Where is my son? What did you do with Lucas?" Leo hid behind me, clearly frightened by the sudden tension in the room. Elias remained calm, but I noticed his hands were trembling slightly. "Lucas is safe," he said. "Safer than he would be if I hadn't intervened." "What does that mean? Where is he?" Elias looked at me, then at Leo, clearly measuring his words carefully. "Helen, you know Lucas was in danger. You know exactly what kind of danger I'm talking about." Helen's expression changed from anger to something that looked like shame, mixed with desperation. "That doesn't give you the right to take my son from me." "I didn't take your son from you. I took your son from a situation that could have cost him his life. What are you talking about? I asked, completely lost in the conversation. Elias sighed deeply. Mrs. Peterson, maybe it's better if you take Leo to play in his room while Helen and I talk about adult matters. No, Helen said firmly. She has the right to know what kind of person is living in her house, taking care of her grandson. I took Leo by the hand and led him to the room, but I confess I left the door ajar so I could hear the conversation. What I heard in the following minutes completely changed my perception of Elias and the complexities of life that I thought I had begun to understand. Helen, you were using drugs in front of Lucas again, Elias said with a deep sadness in his voice. He came to me at the park, crying, saying you had passed out at home, and he couldn't wake you up. That's not true. Yes, it is, and you know it. Lucas told me this has been happening for weeks, that he's sometimes left alone at home for days, when you disappear to use. I heard the sound of sobs coming from the living room. I'm trying to quit. I'm in treatment. I know you are. That's why Lucas is at your sister's house in Oak Ridge, where you both agreed he would stay during your voluntary admission period at the rehab clinic. How do you know about the clinic? Because you yourself asked me to take care of him until you could get admitted. You were in withdrawal that day, don't you remember? The silence that followed was long and heavy. When Helen spoke again, her voice was broken by tears. I don't remember everything that happened that day. The last few weeks are kind of a blur in my memory. Helen, you came to me at the transit center, desperate, saying you couldn't stand putting Lucas at risk anymore. You asked me to take care of him for a few days while you got yourself organized to seek professional help. And why didn't you remind me of that when I came here accusing you? Because I needed to be sure that you were really willing to seek treatment, and not just having another episode of despair that would pass in a few days. I realized at that moment that there was much more to Elias's story than he had initially revealed. His dedication to helping children wasn't just about compensating for the guilt of losing his own son. It was a complex system of protection he had developed for children in real risk situations. Is Lucas okay? Helen asked, her voice now smaller and more vulnerable. He's great. Your sister Marcia has been taking very good care of him. He asks about you every day, but he understands that you're taking care of yourself, so you can be the mom he deserves. Can I talk to him? Of course. Marcia is expecting your call. She said you can visit him whenever you want, as long as you're sober. Helen remained silent for a few minutes. When she spoke again, there was a determination in her voice that wasn't there before. Elias, I need to thank you. If you hadn't helped me that day, I probably would have done something stupid that would have cost Lucas's life or my own. You don't need to thank me. You just need to keep fighting to recover. I'm checking into the clinic tomorrow. It's all arranged. And when I get out, I want to earn back my son's trust. And you will. Lucas is a resilient child, and he loves you very much. I heard footsteps heading towards the front door, and I hurried back to the living room. Helen said goodbye to Elias with a long hug, and before leaving, she turned to me. Mrs. Peterson, you are very lucky to have this man taking care of your family. He saved my son's life in a way you can't even imagine. After Helen left, Elias and I were alone in the living room. Leo had fallen asleep in the room during the conversation, exhausted from the morning of playing in the yard. How many children have you helped this way? I asked. A few, he answered evasively. Whenever a situation arises where I can make a difference. Elias, are you being sought by the police because of Lucas's disappearance? He shook his head. Helen withdrew the complaint yesterday, after she got in touch with her sister and confirmed Lucas was fine. But this kind of misunderstanding happens sometimes when I help families in complicated situations. Isn't it dangerous for you? Living this way, always running the risk of being misunderstood. Elias smiled sadly. Mrs. Peterson, after you lose a child the way I lost Raphael, personal risks become irrelevant. The only thing that matters is making sure other children don't go through what he went through. At that moment, I began to realize that I had invited to live in my home not just a kind man with a sad story, but someone whose entire life had become a complex and potentially dangerous mission. And as the days passed, I discovered that Elias's secrets were much deeper than I had imagined, and that our family was about to get involved in situations that would test not only our trust in him, but our own understanding of what it means to protect the people we love. It was on a Thursday in February, exactly 2 months after the accident, that our seemingly stable life crumbled in a way I could never have foreseen. I was hanging clothes on the line out back when I heard Rose screaming my name from the kitchen door, with an urgency in her voice that made me drop everything and run towards her. "Mom, you need to see this," she said, holding an official letter with trembling hands. "It just came in the mail." I took the envelope and immediately recognized the seal of the Tennessee State Court. When I opened it and began to read the contents, I felt as if the floor had disappeared from under my feet. "Petition for termination of parental rights," Rose read over my shoulder. "Petitioner, the State of Tennessee. Respondent, Rose Peterson. Grounds, parental negligence evidenced by repeated placement of a minor in a high-risk situation." I continued reading the document with growing horror. Someone had reported our family to Child Protective Services, CPS, alleging that Leo lived in inadequate conditions under the care of an elderly woman with possible cognitive impairment, and in the presence of an adult of unknown background. The case had been opened based on multiple reports from neighbors concerned about the child's safety. "Who did this to us?" Rose asked, her voice more of a desperate whisper. At that moment, Elias came into the kitchen from the yard, where he had been playing with Leo. As soon as he saw our expressions and the official paper in my hands, his face went pale. "What happened?" he asked, but from the tone of his voice he seemed to already suspect something. I handed him the document to read. As his eyes scanned the lines, I could see his expression change from concern to something that looked like deep guilt. "Elias, do you know anything about this?" Rose asked, picking up on the same thing I had noticed. He folded the paper carefully and looked at us with a sadness that broke my heart. "I was afraid this might happen." "What do you mean?" I demanded. "For a few weeks I've noticed strange activity on the street. Cars that stop in front of the house for a long time, people taking pictures, neighbors asking other residents about our routine." "And you didn't tell us?" Rose was visibly upset. "I was hoping I was wrong. I was hoping it was just my paranoia." "Paranoia about what, Elias?" I insisted. He sat down heavily in the kitchen chair, as if the weight of a very large secret was finally taking its toll. 3 years ago, in Atlanta, I got involved in a similar situation. I was helping a family where the father was abusing his wife and 2 young daughters. I managed to get evidence of the violence and reported it to the proper authorities. "And what does that have to do with our situation?" The man had political connections in the city. When the case against him started to move forward, he and his lawyers launched a campaign to discredit me as a witness. They spread rumors that I was a disturbed individual who approached vulnerable families with ulterior motives. Rose and I looked at each other, beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. "Elias, are you saying someone is doing the same thing to us?" Rose asked. "It's possible. Since I started living here, some people from my past may have discovered my whereabouts. And if they found out I'm living near a child again..." "Who are these people?" I demanded. "Mainly the man I reported in Atlanta, Marcus Thorne. He was removed from the public office he held, lost political prestige, and always swore he would get revenge on me for destroying his career." The revelation made me furious. "And you thought it was appropriate to bring these problems into our home, putting my grandson at risk. Mrs. Peterson, I thought I had left all that behind. It's been 3 years since I've had contact with anyone from Atlanta. I thought it was safe to start a new life here. Rose was pacing back and forth in the kitchen, clearly trying to process all the implications. Elias, could this lawsuit result in me losing custody of my son? If we can't prove the accusations are baseless, yes. The DA's office doesn't file this kind of petition without believing they have substantial evidence. At that moment, I heard Leo's voice from the yard, calling for Grandpa Elias to help him with something. The contrast between his innocent joy and the gravity of our conversation made me realize how drastically our lives had become complicated in a matter of minutes. "What are we going to do?" I asked, feeling despair start to take over. "First, we're going to hire a lawyer who specializes in family law," Rose said, resuming the practical posture that always characterized her in moments of crisis. "Second, we're going to gather all possible evidence that Leo is well cared for and happy. And third," Elias added, "I'm going to temporarily move out of this house." "No!" The word came out of my mouth with more force than I intended. "You're not leaving. If you do, it will look like we really have something to hide. But my presence here is precisely what's causing the problem. Your presence here saved my grandson's life and brought harmony to our family. We're not going to let malicious people destroy that." Rose stopped pacing and looked at us with determination. "Mom's right. If Elias leaves now, it will look like the accusations are true. Besides, Leo would be devastated." We spent the rest of the afternoon planning our defense strategy. Rose quit her 2 jobs to dedicate herself fully to the case, a decision that worried me deeply because it meant a loss of income at a time when we would need money for lawyers. The next day, we went to the law firm Rose had researched online. Marina Castillo Escars was a woman in her 50s, specializing in cases involving child and adolescent rights, with a solid reputation in the city. "Your case is more complex than it appears on the surface," she said after reviewing all the documentation. "The complaints were very well crafted, with specific details that suggest whoever made them has intimate knowledge of the family's routine." "What does that mean?" Rose asked. "It means it wasn't just a concerned neighbor who made the complaint. It was someone who invested time watching you, documenting situations, and possibly distorting facts to create a seemingly solid case. So, Elias was right about being followed? It's a real possibility, especially considering the history he reported about Atlanta." Ms. Castillo explained that the process would be long and draining. There would be home visits from CPS, interviews with Leo, psychological evaluations of all the adults involved, and hearings where we would have to prove that our family offered a safe and healthy environment for a child. "What's our real chance of winning this case?" I asked. "Hard to say at this point. It depends heavily on whether we can prove the complaints are malicious and demonstrate that Leo is genuinely well cared for and happy. And if we lose? If you lose, Leo will be placed in temporary foster care, while Rose undergoes psychological counseling and parenting classes. In extreme cases, custody can be permanently transferred to another family." We left the law office with a mixed feeling of hope and terror. We had a defense plan, but also a clear understanding of how much was at stake. That night when I put Leo to bed, he noticed something was different. "Grandma, why are you and Mommy sad?" "We're not sad, my love. We're just dealing with some adult problems." "Is it because of Grandpa Elias? Is he going to leave?" The question hit me like a dagger. "Why do you think that?" "Because he was crying in his room this afternoon. And when I asked why, he said that sometimes adults bring problems they don't mean to the people they love." At that moment, I realized our battle was not just against a lawsuit, but against the possibility of losing not only custody of Leo, but also the presence of Elias, who had become an integral part of our family. The following week, the CPS visits began. 3 professionals spent hours in our house, photographing every room, asking questions about our routine, observing the interaction between all of us. Leo, fortunately, behaved naturally, showing the genuine affection he felt for all of us. But it was during the second visit that we discovered something that would completely change our understanding of who was behind the complaints. And this discovery would reveal that our fight was much more personal than any of us had imagined. It was during the 3rd CPS visit that our life took a turn none of us could have predicted. The social worker in charge of the case, Patricia Mendez, was making her final assessment when she received a call on her cell phone that completely changed her demeanor. "Excuse the interruption," she said after answering, "but I've just received information that may be relevant to your case." We were all in the living room, me, Rose, Elias, and Leo, who was playing quietly on the floor with his cars, oblivious to the tension that dominated the adults. "What kind of information?" Rose asked, her voice thick with anxiety. "One of the people who filed a complaint against your family has just recanted. And not just recanted. She admitted she was paid to lie about Leo's living conditions." The silence that followed was deafening. Elias slowly rose from his armchair, his expression a mix of relief and anger. "Who was it?" he asked. "A Mrs. Henderson, who lives in the blue house at the end of the street. She called CPS an hour ago, in tears, saying she couldn't live with the guilt of what she had done anymore. I had known Mrs. Henderson for over 15 years. She was a retired widow who had always been cordial with me. The idea that she could have lied about our family shocked me. But why would she do that?" I asked. "According to her, a man showed up at her house 3 weeks ago, identifying himself as a private investigator, and offered her $200 to sign a document reporting concerns about a child's safety in the neighborhood." "Did she say what this man looked like?" Elias asked, but from the tone of his voice he seemed to already have a suspicion. "40s, well-dressed, driving a black car with Georgia plates. Said he worked for a child protection organization." Elias closed his eyes and sighed deeply. "Marcus Thorne, or someone hired by him." "But why would he do this?" Rose insisted. "Is it worth spending money and energy to persecute you after 3 years?" "Because my report didn't just get him removed from public office," Elias explained. "It triggered a larger investigation that uncovered a corruption scheme involving several people close to him. 2 of the partners in his family's law firm were arrested. The construction company that did business with the city lost several contracts, and his wife divorced him when the abuse became public. The magnitude of the situation began to become clear to me. Elias hadn't just reported a violent man. He had brought down an entire network of interests that revolved around him. "And now what?" Rose asked. Patricia gathered her papers and looked at us with a friendlier expression than she had shown in previous visits. "Now I need to speak with Mrs. Henderson personally, collect evidence of this attempt to manipulate the process, and report everything to the DA's office. If we can prove that the complaints were fabricated, the case against you will be dismissed." "And how long will that take?" I asked. "A few weeks at most. But in the meantime, you can rest easy. With the main witness's recantation and the evidence of manipulation, it's very unlikely the case will proceed." After Patricia left, the 4 of us were left alone in the living room, processing everything that had happened. Leo, who had picked up that something important was being discussed, approached us. "Grandma, is Grandpa Elias not going to leave anymore?" "No, my love. Nobody is leaving." But even with the positive news about the case, I noticed that Elias was more disturbed than relieved. He paced the room with an agitation I had never seen before. "Elias, what's worrying you? We just received excellent news." "That's exactly what worries me, Mrs. Peterson. If Marcus found out where I'm living and tried to harm me once, he'll try again. And next time, it might be more direct. More direct how? He might come himself, or send someone to do something that doesn't involve the legal system. The implication of his words scared me. Are you saying he might try to harm us physically? I'm saying he's a man who has already shown he's capable of violence when he feels cornered. And now he knows his first attempt to harm me failed. Rose, who had remained quiet during our conversation, spoke up with a determination that surprised me. Elias, you saved my son's life and brought peace to our family. If someone wants to harm you, they'll have to go through us first. Rose, you don't understand. Marcus Thorne isn't just a violent man. He has resources, connections, and a thirst for revenge that has consumed him for the past 3 years. So what do you propose? That we run? That we live in fear? Elias sat in the armchair and put his head in his hands. I don't know. For the first time in a long time, I don't know the right answer. It was at that moment that Leo did something that will remain etched in my memory forever. He approached Elias, placed a small hand on his shoulder, and said with that inexplicable wisdom that children sometimes show, "Grandpa Elias, when I was trapped in the car and I was scared, you came and saved me. Now you're scared, and we're going to save you." Elias's eyes filled with tears. It was the first time I had seen him cry since I'd known him. "Thank you, little brave one," he said, hugging Leo. "Sometimes you remind me of what really matters." In the following days, we took several precautions at Ms. Castillo's suggestion. We changed the locks on the house, installed more lighting in the yard, and I started to note any strange movements on the street. Elias, for his part, contacted acquaintances from Atlanta to try to find out more about Marcus's recent activities. It was through these investigations that we discovered something even more disturbing. Marcus had hired a private investigator, not just to harm me, but to find out personal information about our entire family. He knew about Rose's financial difficulties, my medical history, Leo's school, and even our daily routine. "He's planning something bigger," Elias said after receiving the information. "All this investigation isn't just about personal revenge. He's looking for a way to hit us where it hurts most." "Which would be where?" Rose asked. "Leo," he answered simply. "Everything we've found indicates that his next step will be to try something directly involving the boy." The conversation was happening on a Saturday afternoon, while Leo was taking a nap in my room. The March heat was suffocating, and even with the fan on, we were all sweating. "Elias, do you have any specific idea of what he might be planning?" I asked. "Based on what I know about him. Probably something that forces us to make desperate decisions. Marcus is intelligent and manipulative. He knows direct attacks can be traced back to him. So he'll create a situation where we appear to be the guilty ones. For example, a new accident involving Leo, where I'm present and can be blamed. Or a situation where I'm forced to choose between protecting the boy and turning myself into the police on some fabricated charge. The sophistication of the threat left me deeply unsettled. We were dealing with someone who had the resources and intelligence to create problems we couldn't easily solve. "Is there anything we can do to get ahead of him?" Rose asked. "Yes," Elias said with sudden determination. "We can get out in front and tell our version of the story before he has a chance to tell his." "How?" "I'm going to find an investigative journalist here in Knoxville and tell the whole story about what happened in Atlanta, about the persecution attempts, and about how I met you. If we can get the story published, Marcus will lose the element of surprise." The idea was risky, but it made sense. If our version of the facts was public first, any future attempt by Marcus to harm us would be viewed with suspicion. "And what if the journalist doesn't believe our story?" I asked. "Then at least we will have tried," Elias said. "And if something happens to us after that, at least there will be a record that we tried to protect ourselves." That night, after Leo went to sleep, the three of us stayed up planning our proactive defense strategy. For the first time since the lawsuit had begun, I felt we might have a real chance to protect our family. What I didn't know was that Marcus Thorne was already one step ahead of us, and that what he had planned would surpass our worst imagination. In the coming days, we would discover that our fight was not just for the stability of our family, but for the very emotional survival of all of us, especially Leo, who would become the center of a game far more dangerous than any of us could have foreseen. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after we decided to find the journalist. I was making breakfast when the phone rang with that insistence that usually heralds important news. It was Ms. Castillo, our lawyer, and her voice carried an urgency that immediately put me on alert. "Mrs. Peterson, I need you, Rose and Elias, to come to my office as soon as possible. Something has happened that will completely change the course of our situation." An hour later, the three of us were sitting in the office conference room, while Ms. Castillo spread documents across the table, with an expression of disbelief on her face. "Last night, we received a call from Atlanta. Marcus Thorne has been arrested." The relief I felt was so intense, my legs went weak. Rose held my hand, and Elias remained silent, as if he couldn't process the information. "Arrested for what?" he finally asked. "For a series of crimes that include document forgery, bribery, threats, and something you won't believe, attempted kidnapping." "Kidnapping?" Rose leaned forward. "Of whom?" "An 8-year-old child in Atlanta. His plan was to kidnap the boy, and then make it look like Elias was involved, using it as a way to definitively frame him." The coldness of the plan made me sick. "How did they find out?" "The private investigator Marcus had hired to follow you had a change of heart and turned everything over to the police. Apparently, when Marcus detailed the kidnapping plan, the man realized he had gotten involved in something much more serious than simple surveillance." Ms. Castillo went on to explain that the investigation had revealed that Marcus had been planning the operation against our family for months, not weeks. He had spent thousands of dollars hiring people to watch us, to bribe witnesses, and to create the perfect scenario to destroy Elias's life. "There's more," she said. "During Marcus's arrest, documents were found that prove all the complaints against your family were fabricated. Not just Mrs. Henderson's, but several others we didn't even know existed." "Others?" I asked. "Anonymous complaints to CPS, to Leo's school, even to the health department alleging problems in your house. Marcus was creating a complete dossier to ensure that Elias would not only be arrested, but completely demoralized." Elias finally broke his silence. "And now?" "Now, all charges against your family will be officially dropped. More than that, the DA's office will file charges against Marcus for malicious prosecution and stalking." We left the lawyer's office with a feeling of freedom I hadn't experienced in months. But it was on the way home that Elias made a revelation that would forever change my understanding of our story. "There's something I need to tell you," he said as we walked down Magnolia Street. "Something about the day of Leo's accident." We stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. "What do you mean?" Rose asked. "I didn't show up at that accident by chance." I felt my heart speed up. "What do you mean?" "I had been following you for 3 days." The confession left me momentarily speechless. "Following us? Why?" "Because I had received an anonymous tip about a child who was allegedly being neglected by an elderly woman with dementia. The tip included an address, a description of the house, daily routines." Rose covered her mouth with her hands. "Marcus." "Exactly. Now we know it was Marcus who lured me here, probably hoping I would create trouble for an innocent family and end up getting arrested for harassment or something similar." "But then you believed I was negligent?" I asked, feeling a mixture of hurt and confusion. "On the first day, yes. But after observing your routine, seeing how well cared for and happy Leo was, I realized the tip was false. I was about to leave when the accident happened. And you decided to help even though you knew you had been deceived." When I saw that child in danger, nothing else mattered. All the circumstances, all the plans, all the confusion about what was real or fake, it all disappeared. There was only a boy who needed to be saved. We arrived home to find Leo playing in the yard, completely oblivious to all the adult dramas that had dominated our lives in recent months. When he saw us, he ran towards us with that radiant smile that always warmed my heart. "Grandma, does Grandpa Elias get to stay forever now?" The question came out of his mouth with that inexplicable intuition children sometimes show about situations they supposedly don't understand. "Yes, my love," I replied, hugging him. "He's going to stay forever." That night, after Leo went to sleep, Elias found me in the kitchen. I was washing the dinner dishes, enjoying the quiet moment to process everything that had happened during the day. "Mrs. Peterson, can I ask you a question?" "Of course. Do you forgive me for lying about how I came to you?" I stopped washing the dishes and turned to look at him. "Elias, you saved my grandson's life. You brought harmony to our family. You faced persecution and personal risks to protect us. There is nothing to forgive. But I should have told the truth from the beginning." "The truth is that you showed up when we needed you most, regardless of what brought you here. And the truth is also that you've become part of our family in a way that goes far beyond the circumstances that brought us together. In the following months, our life finally found the stability we had been seeking for so long. The lawsuit was officially dismissed. Marcus was sentenced to 3 years in prison, and Elias obtained all the necessary documents to regularize his situation in the city. Rose got a better job at a local company, which allowed her to work only 1 shift and spend more time with Leo. Elias officially became responsible for the care of the house and the boys' supplemental education, and Leo flourished under his attentive guidance. But it was 6 months later that we discovered the most stunning revelation of our entire story. During a casual conversation, Elias mentioned that the full name of the son he had lost was Raphael Peterson Davis. "Peterson?" I asked. "The same as Leo's father's last name?" "Yes," he said. "Why?" Rose, who was listening to the conversation, turned pale. "Elias, what was your ex-wife's full name?" "Carmen Peterson Davis." "Why are you asking?" "Because Carmen Peterson is my cousin. The cousin who lost touch with the family after she moved to Atlanta 15 years ago." The silence that followed was almost sacred. Slowly, the pieces of a puzzle that none of us knew existed began to fit together. "Does that mean," Elias began, "that you're my cousin-in-law?" Rose finished. "And that Raphael was Leo's second cousin? And that it wasn't a coincidence that you saved my grandson?" I added, feeling shivers run down my spine. It was family protecting family, without even knowing it. That night, when we told Leo about the discovery, he just smiled and said, "I knew Grandpa Elias was family. That's why his eyes look like mine when he's sad." Today, a year after the accident that changed our lives, I look at our family gathered on the porch of the house we renovated with the settlement money from the car manufacturer. Yes, the defect in the car was confirmed, and I feel a deep gratitude for all the winding paths that brought us here. Leo, now 8, is a confident and happy child who calls Elias Grandpa without any reservation. Rose found in Elias not just practical help, but the father figure she never had. And Elias finally found a way to honor Raphael's memory while building a new life based on love, not guilt. Sometimes when I watch Elias and Leo working together in the garden, or when I see my grandson running to hug the man who appeared in our lives so improbably, I remember the words Leo said on that first day. Angels exist. Maybe they really do. Maybe they appear when we need them most, disguised as ordinary people who make extraordinary choices at crucial moments. Maybe they have scars and painful stories, but they choose to use their own pain to protect others from going through the same suffering. Or maybe angels are simply people who, after facing their own storms, decide to become a shelter for others during theirs. Regardless of what we call these people, I know that one of them lives in my house, takes care of my grandson, and is part of my family. And I know that when Leo grows up and tells this story to his own children, he will understand that sometimes miracles come to us through paths so complicated and unlikely that they can only be the work of a greater force that protects and guides us, even when we can't see the full plan. Our family, which began divided by mistrust and was almost destroyed by persecution, emerged stronger and more united than it ever could have been without these trials. And Elias, who had lost his own family, found a new reason to live and a new opportunity to be the protective father he always wanted to be. In the end, we discovered that angels really do exist. They save children, protect families, and sometimes they stay forever, turning devastating circumstances into unexpected blessings. And when they do that, they don't just save those who needed saving, they also save themselves in the process. Made it to the end? Thank you so much for your attention. For more stories like this to be possible, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's fast, free, and makes all the difference.